Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times. Today, I am here with the multifaceted Tony Murdock, who was introduced to me by a previous podcast guest, Ananda Mai Baker, and her fabulous children's book, Becoming Strong. It's a beautiful book, incredibly illustrated, and it would make a nice gift for anybody who's got kids in that 4 to 7 year old range. So, with that little business out of the way, Tony, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, if the audience takes a look over your right shoulder, there's a number of pictures and statues and all sorts of paraphernalia. So, and I think that if Tony wants to tell us a little bit about his origin story, it would make a little more sense why he's here.
Yeah, I got my gang here supporting me in my endeavors. So obviously, I'm on a spiritual path. This is Ramakrishna, Buddha, familiar to everyone. It's my teacher, my guru, Ramakrishna Ananda, and I've got some other. Right there is Saint Francis. So I'm very eclectic in my approach to spirituality. But back to the beginnings, before I even knew what spirituality was all about, I was interested in things spiritual, not necessarily religious as such.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, what was happening is my parents would try to get me to church and Sunday school, and I'd have some mysterious illness on Sunday morning, and then I'd have a miraculous recovery at noon and ready to go up to play, and they finally gave up on me. And so I didn't really have a church upbringing as such, but I was always interested in things that were sort of otherworldly, so to speak. And that in my teenage years, I was one summer I was working in the cemetery behind our property, my family property in Willowdale, and hop
Mm-hmm.
over the back fence and go to work, come back. In the evening, I would go in the basement. I'd make candles, drink Oktoberfest beer,
Mm-hmm.
and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So, and I read that whole series. Um, uh, and that I wasn't understanding a lot of it, but there was just something that was
Mm-hmm.
resonating with me. And I was always restless. I wanted to travel. So back in the late 60s, hitchhiking was a norm. And I hitchhiked out to Vancouver Island and went to the west coast of Vancouver Island, Wreck Bay, which is now Frobisher Bay. I think it was last year. It was a free beach. There's several thousand people living on the beach. I was one of them for the summer, a summer hippie.
Mm-hmm.
And I was introduced to Be Here Now by Ram Dass. So I got home, bought my own copy, and not so long after that, I was introduced to the autobiography of a yogi, interestingly, by my mom. My mom was reading it, and the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda was sitting on our coffee table, and his face was staring back at me all the time. And finally, I picked it up, and there's just something that I found mesmerizing about it. And I got my own copy, and it became my travel companion for the next trip, which took me into California.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was looking for the summer of love, but it was 1972, and that was all over. So it didn't,
Ah.
I was in San Francisco, and it was raining, it was drizzly, and I was hitchhiking, and he says, "I don't want to get off here. I'm just going to keep on going," and ended up actually living on the beach at Laguna Beach, which you're not supposed to do, but I
Mm-hmm.
somehow got away with it for a few weeks. So I was living on the beach and reading the autobiography, and oh, Yogananda wrote this in a place called Encinitas, which is just south of where I was. So hitchhiked down and ended up staying there for 2 days. Now, what's interesting about that, that's really where I had my first spiritual high. I
Mm-hmm.
hitchhiked down, and Laguna Beach was the center of the sort of hippie universe down there, you might say, long
Mm-hmm.
hair, beard, and easy to get rides. And I got smoked up. I was high. I walked into the ashram there and asked about, what the facility was. And I ended up giving almost all the money I had left to stay there for 2 days. And I must have reeked of whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was I was smoking.
Of hippie.
So I don't know what the nuns and the monks there thought of me, but what was interesting is that I didn't come down from the marijuana high. I went into a spiritual high. I stayed on this high. And it says, oh, this is what spiritual awareness is all about, spiritual energy. And while I was there, someone befriended me while I was walking around the grounds, and he told me about a kirtan, a musical performance event that was going to be happening in a place called Garden Grove. So I ended up there at the end of the week, and that's where I met Ramakrishna Ananda, who has a yoga center. The yoga center has now been there for over 52 years in Costa Mesa, California. And I was introduced to the teachings of Ramakrishna, and the rest is history, so to speak. But I couldn't stay in California for too long because back in those days, there was such a thing as the draft. And the war had just ended, 1972, but the draft was still on. And I was advised by an ex-FBI immigration investigator that I should leave. Because if I was there longer than, I think it was 6 months, and I was at the 4.5 month mark,
Mm-hmm.
I'd have three options. If I was discovered, I could be drafted, I could be deported without a chance of coming back in the States for a number of years, or I could go to jail. So I decided to leave voluntarily, and that started a back and forth over the years, continuing with school. And because of my interest in spirituality and then it became religion, I did an undergraduate degree at York University in comparative religions.
Mm-hmm.
I did a couple of years at Cal State Fullerton in my back and forth between here and California. And then I went on and did a master's degree in Hindu religious history, Sanskrit, and Christian studies. Um, then I left the PhD program, took a year off, which ended up being forever,
Mm-hmm.
and went into the corporate world, still going back and forth between here and California. And I got lost in the corporate world for a number of
Sure.
years. And at that time, I was meditating, I was practicing, I was very much an introvert, no interest in teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
then one person kept on bugging me, will you teach me how to meditate? And I kept on saying, no, I'm not a teacher of meditation. I'm a practitioner, but not a teacher. Finally, I met with her and said, oh, this is not too bad, and decided to meet the second week. By the third week, there were 5 people, then there were 7 people, then there were 10 people. I had my first class,
Amazing.
and and it just developed from there. Now, my next trip to California, I full disclosure to my teacher, my guru, says I'm teaching, and I hadn't been through any training down there and how to be a teacher, and I fully expected him to say, no, stop it. Um, you're not, you know, trained to do this, and so that's what I was expecting and perhaps even hoping, and so he did a little meditation on this, and he said, okay, continue and don't do any more than this for a while, which was like 3 times what I was doing. And I was like, what? I was fearful and said, I got to put myself out there.
That's the
Anyway,
introvert in you.
yeah, the introvert was really, I wanted to go back to the cubicle at
Mm-hmm.
university and just hide. And that was my comfort zone. And then when the corporate world and I parted company, I still didn't know what I was going to do. But what happened, you might say the universe had different ideas, and I kept on being asked to do additional classes and workshops. Um, I got in touch with someone who invited me to teach meditation, and we started our first at their center, the yoga center, and started my first yoga teacher training program, bringing in philosophy, yoga philosophy, and meditation. And then from there, I started my meditation teacher training program. And before I knew it, I was involved in other programs and sort of have workshop, will travel. I was all over the place, even going out to BC a few times to do a few classes, but then I decided to stay closer to home.
Mhm.
And this has become my passion, it's become my life. And I was doing a lot of running around. Corporate jobs started to come my way, sometimes just lunch and learns, but then some other corporate events came my way.
Mhm.
Um, then I started working at Wellspring. That was almost by default. Wellspring is an agency here in Southern Ontario that supports those who have cancer. So I was teaching meditation and stress reduction, and I've been there for about 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, and I was working at a number of their different locations. Then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And of course, you couldn't go and be with people. And I had to scramble to learn how to be, on a Zoom call, even though I'd done one-on-one Zoom sessions. I never taught
Mhm.
via Zoom. And I had to scramble to get the Wellspring classes going and continuing, and the yoga teacher training continuing, and all my classes continuing. And so a lot of technical hiccups, even from the Zoom standpoint. They were
Mhm.
growing faster than they could handle, and that's what happened. And now I'm about 90%
Mhm.
online running my classes. And one of the nice things about the sessions I do at Wellspring, they were all localized to local demographics, depending on the location I was teaching at. And
Mhm.
then now we have a nationwide audience. In fact, I did a class, what was yesterday? Yesterday morning. 47 people are registered, and one person joined us from the UK. So
Interesting.
we have this international presence that's occurring.
So I have two
So
questions
that
for
kind
you.
of brings me up to where I'm at right now, and this is what I'm doing. Retirement doesn't seem to be on the horizon,
Mhm.
um, even though the gray hair is kind of indicate it should be. I just seem to be getting busier and busier. So here I am.
Yeah. You're maintaining that hippie look.
Well,
So,
I cut my hair off once, like I cut it
mhm.
all back, and that was a good thing because I was traveling again in the States and ended up in Texas where um, I got off. It wasn't a misdemeanor. I was just sort of out after curfew, which I had no idea
Mhm.
there was such a thing. And the police, just because I had I think it was the first year of the Blue Jays. I had a Blue Jays cap on, short.
Mhm.
Beard was off, just a mustache, short, and they just kind of shooed me along my way. And I was
Mhm.
told later that if I had my long hair and my beard, I would have done some jail time, and then they'd ask questions later. So
Mhm.
I tried to grow my hair back at one point. Nah, it just
Me
wasn't
too. Yeah.
working.
So I have two questions for you. Well, I
Sure.
have a lot more, but two primarily right now.
Okay.
So you mentioned that you were sort of on a spiritual path, and then it became a religious path. And I think people often use the two terms interchangeably.
Yes.
And without putting you on the spot, because we didn't talk about this, is there something that delineates the two of them for you?
In my view, yes, this is my opinion, is that there is religion, the formal religion, the institutionalized religion, and then
Mhm.
there is spirituality, a person's individual spiritual growth. Um, and again, my opinion, my view, there are a lot of people who are religious, but not necessarily all that spiritual because
Mhm.
they're following rules more than trying to transform themselves. Then there are people who are spiritual, who aren't tied to any religion. But then there are people who are religious and spiritual at the same time. I've met quite a few of them.
Mhm.
So I tend to define those separately. And even though I did all this work on comparative religions, when it comes
Mhm.
to the eclectic work that I do, because Ramakrishna was very eclectic, he said that all paths are true if you follow them sincerely. So all paths, all religions, all individual pursuits are true and can be of value, but you have to follow them and pursue them with your heart, your mind, your soul.
Mhm.
And that that view is kind of settled with me, and I accept and appreciate all different spiritual paths. There are the norms and the things that make religions specific to themselves and unique. But I've met a lot of people in different religions, and aside from whatever religion they're coming from, they're very spiritual people. They're
Mhm.
following a path with their heart, and they're growing as an individual being, a spiritual being.
Okay, thank you for that. And this is more of an anecdotal because you brought up the COVID again,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if you might have noticed that the people who were regularly meditating and practicing yoga, um, if they seem to have a little more resistance to getting COVID or COVID symptoms.
Uh, Actually, that's a good question, and um, my immediate answer would be no,
Mhm.
because I got COVID. Um,
Mhm.
my guru got COVID. A lot of people that I know that are very advanced in the spiritual path have gotten COVID. So, so the question kind of lends itself to perhaps that term karma, cause and effect,
Mhm.
and on a spiritual path, so you're somewhat protected. My spiritual path will protect me, but I haven't seen evidence of that. And I know of people personally who aren't necessarily religious or spiritual, and they haven't
Mhm.
gotten COVID. So
Mhm.
COVID doesn't seem to discriminate between
Mhm.
religions, what sex you are, where you are in the world. Uh, it all depends on how you're leading your life and how you're mixing with people, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of, you're doing yoga regularly and you're
You're healthier.
meditating, you're healthier, you probably
Yeah.
have a better diet, and your immune system should be a little more robust. It's what I was hoping to hear that.
Yeah, well, I would say there is something to that, and perhaps maybe not full out resistance, but the healthier you are, and we've seen evidence of that just from the medical viewpoint in the news. If
Mhm.
people are really strong from a healthy standpoint, and they get COVID, they have a much better chance of people who aren't healthy and they get COVID. COVID seem to hit people at their weakest level,
Mhm.
whatever their weakness was. And
Mhm.
I know people who have passed away as a result of that. It hit whatever it was that they were struggling with.
Mhm.
But
So,
yeah, so if you're healthier, but I consider myself pretty healthy, and
mhm.
I have a mother who's 98,
Oh,
still going
wow.
strong. She meditates every day. She still
Mhm.
drives,
Does
and
she
I
do your
wanted
yoga
to.
class?
Well, she does her own thing. She's doing something
Okay.
different than me, and so she's one of my heroes.
Mhm.
Um, so she didn't get COVID at all, which is great. But I wanted to see her, so I did all the right things from the medical advice standpoint, getting all my shots and being protected so I can be with her. But still, I got COVID. So even though I was
Mhm.
doing everything that the guidelines were saying to do, somehow or another, the little bugger got me,
Mhm.
and I got COVID. So, and I was really sick.
Mhm.
Not as much, not sick enough to go to the hospital, but I was really sick, and I had what you might call long COVID, which lasted
Yeah.
several months afterward.
Yeah. Same with me. I probably should have gone to the hospital, but
Ah. Yeah, and retrospect is great. I
Mhm.
probably should have too, but I guess there is a fear component in me. That's where sick people are in the
Yeah,
hospital.
yeah.
I'm going to stay home, and we're kind of open concept here, and my wife didn't get it. She didn't
Mhm.
get COVID at all. So uh, you just
One of
never
my
know.
doctors, one of my doctors said to me, hospitals are the worst place for sick people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's where I got COVID because my mother had a fall and she was recovering in the hospital. So I was in there
Mhm.
visiting her, doing actually I was mandated to wear a mask. I was actually yelled
Mhm.
at by a nurse when I was having something to eat and had to drop my mask. And I was yelled at, no, keep your mask on.
Mhm.
And there was COVID on the floor. And I must have breathed in the wrong air particle because I believe
Yeah.
that's where I got it.
So in our pre-chat, and I hope I'm going to phrase this right,
Okay.
we talked about a special project that you're doing that
Right.
you're not really allowed to talk about overtly, but you can
Well,
give people the flavor. And I think this is a very cool
Well,
initiative.
it's this is the fascinating thing about life and how you're connected to the universe. If you want to talk about that and how the universe provides, where I was contacted on Facebook by someone that I don't think I ever met. If I ever
Hmm.
met her, it was maybe once many years ago, but we were connected on Facebook. And she asked me if I'd be interested in being a facilitator in this program that helps to teach mindfulness in the I guess law protection and agency. And it was uh, the Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety. And I was a little resistant at first. It didn't seem to fit into how I'm perceiving myself working. But I contacted the person. In fact, my contact person contacted me, and I forgot about the contact. And he contacted again, and finally said, "Oh, okay, I better talk to him." And I gave him every reason to say that I'm not the right material for your program. But he
This is
hired me
sort of
anyway.
like when you went to California and you were hoping they would tell you to stop teaching meditation.
Yeah, right. Says yeah, and but anyway, I was pulled into it, um, somewhat reluctantly to begin with, and I guess the clincher was as complex as the program is. The program basically, it's an organization out of the States. Most of it's online work. They work with the Oregon Department of Corrections, U.S. Border Patrol, Santa Ana County Sheriff's Office, Marion County Sheriff's Office, LA County Sheriffs, Border Patrol. They're doing work, a lot of the work in the States, are doing some work here in Canada. So some of the work they're asking me to do would be in person. Most of it, though, is online. And they gave me the schedule. And I knew this was going to be the problem because I was already scheduled for last fall. I had my schedule mapped all out. And lo and behold, the schedule fit. I couldn't believe it. So I figured, okay, not that I always work with signs, but I figured, okay, there's
Hmm.
a sign. Okay, I can make it work. So I said, okay, I'll do this. And it's been very rewarding in working with people that are in a really high stress environment.
Hmm.
And again, a lot of it's online, although I've had some in-person sessions. So these people really need it. We kind of keep the spiritual element out of it, although we touch on it, because that's not what this is all about. It's
Hmm.
all about learning mindfulness skills, coping skills, how to deal with triggers. So a lot of psychological tools that are brought into this from a variety of sources. Like, for example, um, Daniel Goldman's book, Emotional Intelligence,
Hmm.
you might say is a main source for this. So how to be mindful of and reflective of and utilize your emotional responses to what's going on in your body, but also what's going on in your relationships, what's going on in your work environment. So it was a whole different avenue for
Hmm.
what it was that I was doing, but it ended up being, quite rewarding. And I'm still involved in this. It's all online right now. So we have people from all over, and facilitators are brought in from various backgrounds. So I'm facilitating rather than teaching. So I'm not teaching. So I'm a little bit unfamiliar with this
Hmm.
because I'm not teaching what I know. I'm just using my skills as a teacher to be a good facilitator. So the
Hmm.
information in the program can be brought to the participants, and we help them process that program, that curriculum, which is not my curriculum.
So mindfulness is so versatile because you
Yes.
can apply it to essentially any habit you're trying to modify. I remember when I first got diabetes and I went to the diabetes clinic, um, the doctor tried to facilitate a mindfulness uh, course, and I don't think he had your skills, to be perfectly frank. But we
Well, the
did do a
mindful-based
book.
stress reduction.
Well, it was to be a mindful eater,
Okay.
and we did a book called "The Joy of Half a Cookie." And I mean, it's helpful. It's very helpful, but it doesn't have to be just for these people who are in these
Yeah.
super
I,
high
I,
pressure jobs.
yeah, this is the challenge these days, because a lot of people are taking, even with my meditation teacher training program, people take the program. It lasts 9 months or so, give or take. And it gives you some of the tools that you need to be a teacher.
Mhm.
But really, you need to come in with some background. You need to come in, be willing to grow. And 9 months is really a short period of time. And I've been meditating for over 50 years, and I'm still learning and growing and deepening my practice.
Mhm.
And with a lot of these programs, this is how I got into Wellspring, because there was a doctor who was teaching um, mindfulness at Wellspring, that's what's supporting people with cancer. And he said, "Well, I did the training." He had no experience in meditation. He did the training, like a 2 weekend program or whatever it was. And he
Mhm.
says, "I'm not equipped to do this." So I came in and I said, "Okay, and I'm not equipped to do the mindful-based stress reduction, but I have my own program. Can I teach my own material?" And they said yes. So that's how it
Fantastic.
started. Um, until the higher administration got wind of it, and they wanted to clamp down on what it was I was doing. But
Bureaucrats.
but in the long run is I'm still there, and I'm still basically doing what I feel needs to be done,
Mhm.
following their guidelines, more or less. But they know they've got someone that can be of assistance to the members, so they kind of let me. They give me a long leash, so to speak.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, Tony, we're almost out of time,
Ah, okay.
so we're going to have to wrap it up here. Not that you have a lot of time, but if somebody wants to get hold of you, what's the easiest way for them to find you?
Probably email, because I've got a cell number, but I never have the cell on. Should I give it to you right now, or
Uh,
you can leave a message and I
yeah,
can get
I'll
back
put
to
it in
you.
the show notes, but uh,
Okay, yeah, they can probably the best is by email, so I'm always
mhm.
checking email, and taking it from there. By another little plug, with all the different things that I'm doing, I'm an officiant. I marry
Oh, I
people in
forgot about that.
Ontario. So if you're looking for an officiant, give me a call, and
Yeah.
happy to be of service. 48 weddings last year.
Mention the Dead Man Walking podcast and you'll get a 20% discount.
Yeah, there we go.
No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Definitely no discount. Okay. Well, Tony, thank you for coming on and thank you for all the good work you've done and the good work you're continuing to do. And I wish you much success in the future. And hopefully we'll have another chat at some point.
Okay, well, thank you. It was wonderful meeting you, and my thanks go out to our mutual friend Anandamoy, who I know from the Yoga Center of California, down in Costa Mesa, California, and perhaps you and I will meet in person because we don't live that far from each other,
No, we don't.
relatively speaking.
Yes. Thank you to everybody who tuned in to this episode of the Dead Man Walking podcast. Please like, subscribe, share. If you're into mindfulness and all those other things, get in touch with Tony. He's a good man. He'll put you on the right path.
Okay, thank you. My
This is
pleasure.
where we
Bye-bye.
say namaste.
Namaste. The soul within
Okay.
me honors the soul within you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Have a great week, everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.